In the summer of 1956, the summer between 2nd and 3rd grade, I went to Girl Scout camp, Camp Waiaka on Thompson Lake in Otisfield, Maine. It was the first time I had ever been away from home overnight. I celebrated my 8th birthday that summer with a birthday cake cooked by fellow brownies over an open fire. It was a little, well, maybe more than a little, if I'm entirely honest, burned on the bottom. We cut that part off. But the thoughtfulness was certainly appreciated, and I got presents, the kind of brownie camp presents that friends would give one another. I had my first experience in making my own musical instruments. A set of handmade sticks painted the most brilliant shade of blue. And amidst the trying to learn to swim a little, or at least trying to not be quite so afraid of trying, and lots of other wonderful camp activities, I learned some things about the world I was growing up in that have stuck with me over the years. I've mentioned here before that I accidentally, if such a thing can be an accident, attended my first Roman Catholic Mass that summer. Innocently enough, when the camp counselors announced that there would be a bus taking campers to the Catholic Church, I simply signed up and took the bus as well. Church was church. I didn't know there were different kinds. Only later, after I had already experienced a church service different than my own, lots more kneeling than we ever did at the West Auburn Congregational Church. Only later was I taken aside by the camp director, probably more concerned about what my parents might think in their allowing a little Protestant camper to attend a Catholic church in the mid-1950s. But I was more concerned about feeling embarrassed, being, in a sense, called on the carpet as if I had done something wrong and should not have gone. In later years, I would reflect on that as my first experience of recognizing the brokenness within the body of Christ. I had another experience that summer that I don't believe I've ever talked about, till I mentioned it briefly as my husband and I were returning home from a visit with our children up in Massachusetts. The brownie camp I attended employed African American women as staff in the kitchen and dining hall. It was a new experience for me. My school, my church, my neighborhood, the people I saw in stores, all pretty much looked like me. One of the women who was working at the camp that summer had a daughter who was about our same age, 8 or 9. She didn't have a lot to do, not being old enough to work, and not really being a camper. But she was interested in the same things we were, enjoyed playing the same games, and we enjoyed it too. Until she was told that she couldn't play with us. And we were told by our camp counselors that we were no longer supposed to play with her, or she would get in trouble. It was the summer of 1956, and the world in which I was growing up was not what I imagined it to be, nor what I believe now that God imagined it should be as well. But the world was changing, not nearly fast enough, but the world was changing. I learned a lot of things that summer, how to play music on bright blue sticks, and that there were broken places in the world that grown-ups believed they understood, and that children needed to learn about as well. Those were first experiences in my own unfolding realizations as I grew up that the world is a complicated place. And some of the things we take for granted ought not to be accepted. Some things need to change, and we can be a part of changing them. There is a lot about the story of that summer I will never know, most especially the story from the other side, how it felt for that little girl to be told she couldn't play with us. Was her mother concerned about what we might say or do? I grew up a little more that summer of my 8th birthday. My family got our first television set later that year. I also got a new baby sister. Before we had our own TV, we used to visit our nearest neighbors, an elderly German farmer and his wife, whose son had bought them a TV a year or so before my father bought ours. I went occasionally with my older brothers to watch Saturday Westerns. I was particularly fond of Gene Autry. Or some evenings we would go with my father to watch the game show 21, my father matching his knowledge with contestants who apparently we later learned had been given the answers in advance. With a television of our own, I began to see more of the world, watching the news unfold, seeing the differences and the difficulties that separated us into political parties. We were Republicans. We liked Ike, but also separated us into different religions and races and ethnic groups, nations, and ideologies. The world was already changing for everyone to see. The Supreme Court had already said that the nation's schools could no longer be legally segregated, but it took courageous action by leaders and ordinary people over the next decade to realize change. And people of faith, including children, would be among those who would lead this nation. Ruby Bridges was a little girl just entering 1st grade when the public school system of New Orleans was integrated by fiat. They were told that they had to accept African American students, and they began by selecting a few who were asked if they would be among the first. Ruby Bridges was one of those little girls. And for almost a year, every day, she would walk to school